Hey guys, I want to make a short video recapping what we've covered so far in class. In this one we're going to go over the things that we covered on the first 2 weeks of class, excluding the syllabus. And the first thing that you'll want to remember is the working definition of what argument means for us. What argument means in an academic setting, what it means in a real life setting, and so on. Not what it means in mainstream media, or perhaps in politics. You need to remember that arguments attempt to resolve issues between two or more parties. You need to remember that argument is rational disagreement, but that it can de-evolve into some sort of emotional, irrational fight. At this point, it's no longer an argument for reasons that we will discuss later on. You need to remember that argument can result in agreement or compromise, and that argument is standing up for your ideas by being persuasive. What argument is not is angry people yelling past each other. And you need to remember that the goal of argument for us is to bring about a change in the audience's initial position on a controversial issue. Your audience will seldom be the person that you are arguing, but instead will be the reader of your paper, or if you're giving a speech, the people who are present in that speech or in that debate. If you look at IQ squared, for example, the audience in this case is not the opponent. The audience are the people present. You will also need to remember that there are certain conditions that need to be met for something to be called an argument, in the sense that we're using the term. First, you need an issue. That is something that has not been settled. That issue has to have potential to generate at least 2 or more points of views. Let's take, for example, the use of bottled water. Is it good for the environment? Is it good for us as human beings? You're also going to need an arguer, not just for one perspective, but for 2 or more of the potential perspectives that exist when looking at an issue. So if you look at the gun debate, for example, you will need at least someone to argue for tighter gun control and someone to argue for less gun regulation, for example. You'll need an audience, that is someone to listen. That audience may or may not be your opponent. For our situation, our audience will be an external reader, not the person who you are engaging in the debate. And you will need a forum, that is somewhere for you to put out your views. Now there are situations in which argument doesn't really exist. This happens when there is no reason to disagree or no disagreement. If no one disagrees on anything, there is really no argument to be made about anything. And when you have 2 or more people trying to persuade each other to change their minds, but everyone in the discussion holds true to their beliefs and is unwilling to listen to anyone else's perspective. In that case, we don't have an argument. What we have is just people screaming past each other. Remember, again, that for us, argument is not the image that comes to mind when we hear the word argument. It's not 2 people fighting and screaming. It's a more civilized version of argument, what the Greeks actually intended when they came up with the concept. Now there are different ways in which arguments manifest in our daily lives. Some of them are the public debate. This is, for example, when you have candidates running for public office and they want to persuade the voters to, well, vote for them. You have the courtroom argument. That is when a lawyer and a prosecutor are pleading a case, usually to a judge or a jury, and they attempt to persuade the judge or the jury to believe their argument. You have the single perspective argument, and if you've written a 5-paragraph argumentative essay for your high school class, that would be one version of the single perspective argument. Remember that for our purposes, this is not what you're going to do, as it's not entirely effective unless you're essentially preaching to the choir. You have the one-on-one everyday argument. This is something that happens every day between friends, acquaintances, significant others. You have academic inquiry, which usually happens in professional conferences and classroom settings when people are trying to build new knowledge. That would be academic inquiry. You have negotiation and mediation. This is when a disinterested third party tries to get 2 opposing perspectives or representatives for 2 opposing perspectives to meet halfway. And this is what's called Rogerian argument. We'll look at that later on. And you have the internal argument. This is something that, if you've stuck with me so far, you're having right now. Should I continue watching the video? It's something that you do every day when you wake up. Do I want to go to college? What should I eat? All of those are examples of internal arguments. Now for our purposes, arguments will be made through texts. What you need to remember is that no text is ever created in a vacuum. Every text has what's called a rhetorical situation. This essentially means that no matter what it is that you're writing or what you're reading, you need to be aware of who is doing the writing, that is, who is the author of a message, what is the meaning of the message, meaning what are we talking about, and who is the reader of the message. Take into consideration the following example. When someone says, I worry that our most valuable pitchers could crack in this heat. If the author is a manager and he's talking about a game day in August to one of the Ranger players, then clearly our most valuable pitchers are baseball players. But if the person saying the message is an employee at a glassware store and he's talking about an AC outage in August to his manager, the pitcher would be the utensil that you use to pour drinks. If you look at the rhetorical situation closely, what you'll notice is that pretty much any text can change meaning depending on who is writing the text and who the audience interpreting the text is. There is no such thing as a universal meaning, especially when you consider the nuances of language. Right, so moving on, now that you know what it takes for there to be an argument, and now that you know that you should be aware of audience and author considerations, I'm going to give you some pointers about how to actually make a claim. Most of you would usually start an argument with, I believe. And the thing about using that sort of language is that it's perfectly fine. You can believe anything you want. It certainly shows that you clearly stand by your position. However, belief is something that's deeply personal, a deeply ingrained part of our identity. Whatever it is that you believe, it is usually not a position that you have as much as it is a part of who you are. That's why usually debates about religion don't really get anywhere. People who believe in a higher power see that as part of who they are. People who don't believe in a higher power see that as a part of who they are. And despite all the niceties and carefully worded language, when it comes down to it, really, when someone argues for or against the existence of a supreme being, the way that it's perceived is not as a rebuttal to the idea as much as it is seen as personal attack. And so when you start an argument with I believe, not only are you saying I am not open to discussion, you are also saying if you attack my argument, you're attacking me. You are offending who I am. And that's not how you want to approach a rational argument, whether it's in an academic setting or elsewhere. Rather, instead of using that term, use I am going to argue, or perhaps something like it would be prudent to consider. Or this use of language implies that you will put an idea out there, that it's an idea that you have arrived at through careful consideration, but that you are more than welcome to listen to dissenting opinions. And so that will make you come across as someone credible, who's open-minded, and who is ultimately worth reading. Furthermore, when you're engaging an issue, you don't want to jump right in and state what you think. You want to give the reader some background information about the issue itself. This is what's called a narrative. Essentially what you're doing is structuring your argument in the way that's suggested by the title of this very interesting book, They Say, I Say. Essentially, you'll explain that other people have written things about your issue. This is what they say. However, there are other different perspectives that people might not have considered. That would be your perspective, and so this is what I say. They say, I say. That's what we've covered so far. I hope this has been useful for you guys. Make sure to save this video somewhere. It might come in handy for when you have to take your midterm or your final. I'll see you in class.